The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this manager was squandering the man's property. So he summoned the manager and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I'm dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, the manager asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' The debtor answered, 100 jugs of oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then the manager asked another, 'How much do you owe?' The debtor replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And the manager's master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you, who have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord. Be seated. Today's parable is often titled the parable of the dishonest manager. It's not exactly one of Jesus' most cut and dry parables. Lost coins, lost sheep, that's much easier to assign the roles and apply the meaning. But this story, not so much. It's clear as mud. And asking what God is up to in this story is not so easy to see or understand. But I think that's okay. Actually, I think it's more than okay, because neat and tidy answers and explanations, they have a tendency to put Jesus in a box. And if death and the tomb couldn't hold him, well, then I think our neat and tidy boxes don't stand a chance. We started confirmation this week, and as we laid the ground rules for our year ahead, we agreed that we should bring our questions. Questions are good. When we have questions, we're open to receiving new ideas. Well, today we might very well be baffled by Jesus. But we're not alone. Scholars who study this stuff even admit to not being able to quite crack the code on this one. So we're in this together. We'll take it from the top, and we'll allow ourselves to wonder about a few things and see where it leads. So there's this rich man who has a manager who handles his business dealings, and he gets wind that this manager is squandering his property. Now, right away, that word squandering, it catches my attention. It reminds me of someone. Reminds me of the prodigal son, the lost son. Now, we didn't hear about him last week alongside his companions, the lost sheep and the lost coin. But actually, that is the parable that Jesus tells right before he tells this one. So remember, in that story, the son squanders his inheritance, and the father forgives him and welcomes him home. The definition of prodigal then might be extravagant or lavish, spending too much. The son squandered, and we call him prodigal. So if the manager squandered, could this better be titled the parable of the prodigal manager? Anyway, the rich man calls his manager in, and he says, "What is this I hear about you? Audit your books. I need to see what you've been up to. I can't keep you as my manager anymore." Well, the manager knows he's in trouble. His job's on the chopping block, and he knows he's not cut out for manual labor or for panhandling. What can he do to guarantee something to fall back on when the truth comes out? Just one more aside here to add to our confusion, but I can't help but wonder, how dishonest is this guy really then? I mean, if he was so dishonest, wouldn't he just cook the books some more? Hide what he's doing from his boss a little longer? Couldn't he set up a scapegoat and have some underling take the fall for him? It kind of sounds honest, or at least self-aware, to know he'll lose his job and then admit that he's not much for hard labor or for looking for handouts. Maybe he isn't dishonest so much as just not frugal, not always careful with how he spends the boss's profits. Extravagant, lavish, prodigal. So the manager devises a plan. He calls in the people who are in debt to his boss, and he adjusts their accounts. Some by 20%, some as much as 50%. Now, perhaps the deals he is cutting will earn him some favor with these people when he is out of a job and he needs a place to stay or something to eat. Well, eventually the manager's actions get back to the rich man, and he's surprisingly, confusingly commends the manager's shrewdness. The boss has to maybe almost smile in spite of himself and say, "Yeah, I see what you did there. It's kind of brilliant." Now, we don't know if his boss was so impressed with his shrewdness that the manager kept his job. I mean, after all, the boss is out even more money now that the manager applied these generous discounts. Well, perhaps Jesus' next words will explain some more to us, or maybe not. But Jesus offers us this: whoever's faithful in the little things is also faithful in the big things. If you can trust someone to keep the storefront swept clean, well, then you can trust them to keep the accounts balanced. Whoever's dishonest in the little things will also be dishonest in the big things. So if your employee has some random excuse every morning, walking in 5, 10, 15 minutes late, will they be ready for the big deadline for a big presentation to the customer? So Jesus seems to be drawing a line, dividing up the faithful and the dishonest. Seems simple enough. And then he says more of the same thing differently. If you can't be trusted with dishonest wealth, well, who will trust you with true riches? Well, that makes sense too. It's just a different way of saying what he already said. If you can't be trusted with a little, how can you be trusted with a lot? But then Jesus starts to draw another line here, with dishonest wealth on one side and true riches on the other. Okay, now this we know, right? We know what those true riches are. Jesus has described them to us before in other ways that are much more clear. He says true riches are the things that never fade, they never rust, they never get moth-eaten. True riches aren't possessions that we own, they aren't things we earn. True riches are the gifts that we receive from God. So forgiveness, mercy, grace, love, eternal life, that's God's economy. That's the economy of the kingdom. It's where the first are last and the last are first. It's where the poor receive good news and the blind receive their sight and the captive receives freedom. So does that mean that everything else that's not true riches is what Jesus calls dishonest wealth? I mean, come on, we work hard. We come by our finances honestly. We didn't steal or cheat for them. We earned them fair and square. How can everything except true riches then be dishonest wealth? Well, maybe we need to go just a little further. Because Jesus also reminds us that we can't serve two masters. We can't serve God and wealth. Now, the word originally used is the word mammon. can't serve God and mammon. But mammon wasn't really a word, it was a name. It was the name of a false god, an idol that represented wealth. So that does help a bit, I think, because we know that wealth and money and financial status and all the stuff we possess, that can be an idol. It can be something that rules us, that holds us captive in our decisions. But money isn't the only idol that rules us. And we could put any other idol in its place. We can't serve God and idols. We can't serve God and something that draws our attention from God. We can't deal in the economy of our idols and the economy of the kingdom. Now, all other idols aside, the biggest, most tempting idol we serve is ourselves. My most distracting idol is me. What's in my best interest can sometimes rule my actions. Isn't that what the manager was doing by cutting those accounts down by 20 and 50%? He was saving his own skin, seeking favor with those who could help him later. It's almost impossible for us to remove ourselves from the equation in whatever we do. So is that what Jesus is pointing to, telling us to do? Because then it sort of sounds like, well, if we can just try hard enough to be faithful with all of this stuff that can be our idol, well, then God will trust us with true riches. But then all of a sudden, well, the alarm bells go off because I know I can't. I can't do it. If this isn't an if you do this, then you'll get this sort of thing, well, I'm doomed. We're all doomed. Maybe we can be trusted most of the time, but never all the time. At some point, dealing in the economy of this world, we're going to forget who's truly in charge. We're going to try to accumulate those things that are less than true riches, and we will try to save our own skin. I can't serve God and serve me as my own God. None of us can. The great commandment is to love God and love our neighbor. So it seems we can serve God and our neighbor. And for me and for you, each of us who are part of a whole community of creation, well then what that means is that what's God's good intention for my neighbor is also then God's good intention for me. I heard a story a few years ago about a football team in Texas. With only 5 seconds left in the game, only 1 point behind, and on the 1 yard line, the Woodlands High School JV football team knelt down and they let the clock run out. They gave victory to their opponents. What does it mean that in Texas, a place where high school football is practically a religion, a team deliberately and intentionally chose to lose a game that they could have easily won? Well, we need to know the whole story. Because just 40 minutes prior, on what was probably going to be the last play of the game, a player-to-player collision sent someone from the opposing team off the field with an injury that was severe enough to be life-flighted away for emergency care. Now, sure, it was a tough break, but players get injured in games, stuff happens. You win some and you lose some. But the coach and his team saw no profit in this situation. Celebrating a win would be hollow and empty. And so by intentionally losing the game, the Woodland JV team gained true riches that couldn't be measured. It was a kingdom moment right there on a football field in Texas. It wasn't how the world works, but it's how the kingdom works. It's how it works in God's economy. Losses and profits, that's language for the world's economy. And in God's economy, there is more, so much more. Jesus died and was raised into new life. In his death, he triumphed. And in what the powerful would count as loss, Jesus gained what God loved most. This world with you and me in it. Jesus had nothing left to lose if he lost us. And so he gave it all. He turned the world's economy on its head. He reversed it. He toppled it. So maybe this parable is still clear as mud. And questions are always going to be part of being God's beloved children, studying and wrestling with God's word. Maybe this one will never quite add up. But there is one thing that isn't in question, that's never in question, that we can trust to be true. And that is that Christ is faithful in all things, big and small. And by serving God, Jesus served us. And for that we give thanks. Amen.